I'd like for us to have a very fluid conversation on hybrid cloud and, bringing the best of both worlds. But first and foremost, Munyao, tell us about this target and how you got it, and what it means for us as a country and probably as a region. It's on. I think it's good.
It's good, yeah. Thank you so much, Paul. The jacket, of course, comes from, it's a recognition for the hard work that, cloud enthusiasts put into acquiring knowledge and skills, contributing to the community at large, as well as mentoring the juniors who are entering into that space. For me, it's, first of all, thank you to DX5 for the recognition. It means a lot to this community. And for me, it's about the awareness that it creates in this space. A lot of people now know about AWS and cloud at large, just by the mere fact of the recognition and the publicity that this has created. Personally, it's a challenge to continue to learn more, to mentor more people, and to continue contributing to the community.
Excellent. And just for a bit more perspective, it means that he's qualified across, is it 12?
I've done 15, but the threshold is 12.
The threshold for the target is 12 12 current certifications, and he's at 15. And, last year I just kept seeing him on LinkedIn just saying, been there, done that, been there, done that. So the talent conversation, this guy should be the poster child of saying, if we can do it, because you're the only holder in Africa, am I right?
There are a couple of peers as well in South Africa.
Okay.
I think in Nigeria as well. So the community is growing, and, hopefully this year we get to see, a lot of more people acquiring it, and not just the jackets and not just the certifications, but also skills, and being able to mentor as many people as possible.
Fantastic. I see David has joined us. Karibu sana. Hakuna shida. We need to do what we need to do. So we'll jump right in, and I'll come back to you, Munyao, and talk about vendor lock-in. So anytime we discuss solutions about cloud, many executives already are spooked by the thought of vendor lock-in. Why are they giving me credits? Why are they helping me migrate? What is the, what's hidden in there? So how do you suggest we go around looking at a hybrid cloud strategy to maximize the flexibility and avoid issues of vendor lock-in?
I think, first of all, that fear is based off the experience and what currently exists in most of our companies. And one is the nature of systems that we use, very coupled. There's, when you look at contracts that are existing, is you find these businesses are already tied to, contracts and SLAs that they need to break off, right? In the process of trying to avoid that vendor lock-in is to, try and adopt technologies that are more vendor agnostic, cloud agnostic, such that you do not over-rely on a single provider for specific solutions. One way is perhaps to try and use containerized applications that you can host across multiple environments. Think about also the multi-cloud adoption, such that you do not over-rely on one. And then distribute your applications, of course, based on what is the requirement for that application in terms of performance, in terms of where you're deriving that data, and then free yourself from, relying on just a single vendor.
Oh, excellent. And maybe to you, David, now, you talked about as a systems integrator, these contracts that he spoke of, you probably are the one who's pushing them. So my question to you is that this issue of cost must be, if not the top, must be in the top 3 concerns for customers. And how do you take us through optimizing what we put in the cloud vis-a-vis costs and vis-a-vis every other thing that a business would be pursuing, like efficiency and reliability?
Yeah, thank you, and sorry for running late. So I think from us as a system integrator, we look at the best of breed. So we look at our tools, like observability tools. So we look at, when you talk to a client, you look at all his historical information. We don't want to push down a specific cloud provider or a specific solution to him. So we want to make sure that we can pull all that metrics and come and tell him, in the last 1 year, in the last 2 years, this is what your platform has been running. Mm-hmm. Yeah, resources are running this way. So your best way is to go with this kind of environment. Now, I'll give you an example. I was talking to a certain CIO and he told me he's spending 200 million on storage. So I told him, before you spend that money on storage, can we just put observability tools in the environment? So when we ran the tool, you could actually look at and see sprawl. You could see a lot of ghost shadow servers that have not even been spun for like 6 months. You could see a lot of VMs that have not been touched in 3 months. And I'm asking him, what are these VMs? And he says, these are our dev guys. So imagine we reduce that and we're able to cut 40% of the resources you're talking about. 40% is 80 million from that 200 million he was going to spend. Now, whether he spent the money or not, I don't know, but that's what we're talking about.
I've got an interesting question right there, and this is the CIOs in the room. A systems integrator, sometimes there's a fight for budget, right? Saying, hey, you're coming to tell me what to do. Can you come down on your costs a bit? But in this case, you said what you discovered could have saved them 80 million shillings.
Exactly.
Are they willing to pay a value of what you save them? Or, how are you having that discussion around cost and value exchange? Because it reminds me of this story about the guy who had the spanner and knew where to go fix. And then, the owner of the business says, but he only turned one bolt. And the guy said, yeah, I knew which bolt to turn. That's what you're paying for. So in this case, what's the sense in the market, discussing value exchange with customers?
Unfortunately, when you go to a customer and you put your tools in, he'll be prepared to buy the tool for the long run, but he's not going to pay you for consulting. And he'll tell you, you've done a good job, I will give you a job. And when you're looking at it, it's probably 5% of that 200 million, which is fine because at the end of the day, you've gained trust. Mm-hmm. And now you are talking on the same level with the customer. The good thing about customers, once you've gained trust with the customer, even when he goes to the board and you listen, it's your voice speaking in the board.
Yes.
Yeah. In fact, some guys, I get a call from the GM telling me, boss, our CEO came and I could hear you talking.
That's a great way of, when you do knowledge transfer, then you've got ambassadors, you've got people speaking for you in rooms that you're not even in. Excellent. To you, Mutua, another day, another breach. Right? We know the most recent one you are talking about, whether or not it is being received as a breach or not. So how can we enhance? And those solutions are out in the cloud, and we're thankful that they're out in the cloud, because without it, we'd have to be queuing somewhere in the CBD to get services. So how do we balance that? How do you balance going into the cloud and also being very cognizant about the risk that presents?
Thank you, Timothy. Thank you, DX5, for the invite. It's always a pleasure to join these forums and share some of the things that we are doing and our thoughts around matters hybrid, security, and all that. So yes, another day, another breach, and becomes a concern. We're having to straddle the on-prem world with the cloud world, multi-cloud world. And of course, it becomes a bit of a challenge to the leaders in the room to figure out how do we strike a balance to help support our business get whatever outcomes we're trying to get to, which is business value at the end of the day. So some basic concepts I'll share, right, that you could think about as you embark on that hybrid world. And it starts with basic concepts like things like zero trust architectures, right? So trust nobody, verify everything, right? As you're moving systems, from on-prem to the cloud, try and have that in mind, where systems are authenticating against each other to make sure that the right allowed communications are happening. So that's a basic concept. The other one is making sure you have consistency in the tools that you have, right? So do not have some tools for on-prem and some tools for the cloud to do the exact same thing, right? First, you're duplicating resources, goes to the numbers you're talking about here. You're spending hundreds of millions trying to achieve the same outcome when you could deploy a single tool that cuts across, a hybrid world, right? Whether be it multi-cloud, on-prem cloud, name it. So have tools that are able to do that. We have them today. I think we already have them in our environments. It's just a case of evaluation, sit with an integrator, find out from them whether this tool is fit for purpose, for the cloud world. We have SMEs around, for example, in the AWS world that can walk you through that kind of evaluation, right? And in tools, we're also thinking about internal practices, right? So when you think about stuff like identity and access management, for example, you have no reason to have, let's say, an IDP, which is an identity provider for AWS, another one for Azure, another one for on-prem. You could singularize this, right? Something that I see, entities do is implement concepts like single sign-on across your entire estate, right? It's technically feasible, can be done, and you're able to do that. Then again, I think data sensitivity, as you're shifting data to the cloud, that becomes, I think, a bit of a concern. We're having conversations around data sovereignty, and it's a discussion that's happening. I think if you're talking about AI, the data that you're taking out into the, into the cloud world, should we be taking it there and so on? So think about data classification, know what data you have, right? And in knowing what data you have, in that classification, also you should know where your data is, right? So data location becomes an important thing, I think something that you need to think about so that you don't find yourself in a world where you've taken PII data out into the cloud and probably should not have done that. You should have kept that in-house to sort of, help you get there. And I think just cap it, enablement, capacity building, right? So that I don't belabor the point. Capacity building is going to be essential. So before you undertake these initiatives, right, train your people and, talk to integrators, talk to OEMs, talk to industry experts, get that insight on what skill sets you need to have in your organization before you embark on this journey, where you don't find yourself taking things or deploying platforms in a hybrid world and you're pulling that back, losing the value in that you could find in either an AWS, Azure, GCP, on-prem, and so on. So
excellent. Yeah. I have a question around maybe what are the. Sometimes when we think about breaches, we think about things that are overly complex because we watch very many Hollywood movies. But how are we actually seeing that happen in a local context or across Africa? What are the kindergarten mistakes that most of the people in this room are making that leave them vulnerable? Would you have some insight on that?
Yes, and it's actually very basic stuff, right? Like you find systems that are deployed and basic stuff like security in transit, security at rest, encryption in transit, encryption at rest is not implemented, for example. Just basic use of things like keys, basic implementation of stuff like TLS. Let's say you have a database that sits on-prem and you have, let's say, an application server that sits in the cloud and you're trying to implement a secure connection back to that database, you find people exposing databases using public IPs. I mean, you'll get hammered. I can guarantee you that many times and from many places. Yeah. So those are some of the rookie mistakes that we see happening. So again, like I said, that can be addressed with capacity building, just enablement, getting a team to understand the implications of taking stuff out there in the public cloud, and then building out a scope of work that addresses all those security concerns, and then having the right architectures that sit well in the hybrid world. Yeah.
Asante, now I'd like us to move from execution, rather to move to execution, and how we can look at migration of, say, services when you're looking at hybrid cloud. You've got something on-prem, you've got something that you're looking to move into the cloud for whatever purposes. And this question is for you, Munyao. How do we then look at doing that seamlessly? What are the phases that we should look at or consider when transitioning our workloads from into a hybrid cloud environment?
Of course, a successful migration has a couple of phases, and you want to begin with first assessing the migration readiness with a particular subject, just to understand how prepared in terms of people, processes, governance, and so forth for them to migrate to cloud. You also want to do a thorough discovery or the assessment of the specific workloads that are, subject to migration. Understand the interdependencies for each particular workloads. What are the requirements in terms of performance? If there is any requirement in terms of understanding and grouping the data so that you identify what data needs to be segregated and kept on-prem. Post-migration, of course, you want to do now the execution itself, but prior to that, you want to begin small, right? You can choose a smaller, a simpler workload that you can pilot, have well-defined SLS and a success criteria to, identify areas that you need to optimize during the migration or post-migration. And then move that, test it over a period of time, understand how each of those workloads perform in different, public cloud. You can as well use private cloud for workloads that require perhaps or are regulated for, sovereignty. And then move what needs performance at scale to public cloud, such as AWS or Azure. You also post that you want to keep optimizing, right? Ensure that you're optimizing for performance, you're optimizing for cost and security, as Zioka said. And obviously, this process is continuous, right? A bit of applications might require a lift and shift. Others you might refactor, especially if you want to modernize. If you want to move to multi-cloud, of course, you want to try and decouple, as much as you can, containerize applications that you can, switch to, vendor agnostic databases, and try to escape from, solutions or services that are really tying you down to a specific vendor. A lot of times the migration, of course, might not succeed if you've not done the planning well, right? And designing the architecture blueprints for the specific workloads, especially if you're looking at adopting a multi-cloud strategy, right? So you build a proper architecture blueprint for your application, keep testing it, and then migrate at phase.
From your experience, what have you seen as the shortest migration timeline, and what has been the longest one, and what are the challenges that you've seen in the market?
A lot of migrations, actually, the success of the period that it takes depends on one, whether the planning was done properly, right? Some customers have budgets to migrate, others the budget is ad hoc, right? Because they're identifying workloads on the go and saying, oh, we've realized that for this application to work, it requires that other application. Do we move it? Does it stay on-prem, or what happens? In some other cases, how fast we are able to migrate is also determined by what's the driving force, right? In some cases, if it's just a long-term IT strategy, it might take longer. If it's an enterprise, it might take longer. In a case where, the on-prem infrastructure is end of life, they are driven by urgency, we need to move, or there's a licensing issues and they want to take advantage of cloud native services, then of course that drives how fast we do it. Again, it's a people and processes activity. Some customers would want to fast get the capacity in-house, right? At least train a few people so that they are able to, in the long term, be able to support themselves. In some other cases, if you, of course, as the solution partner, you're able to provide a cost-effective solution for them, and then that drives them to want to adopt the migration much faster.
Excellent. Asante. David, to you now, we've looked at the stack. I want us to shed some light on the processes, especially governance. If you're dealing with budgets that are, how many of us have 200 million shilling budgets for IT? 500 million?
I think they're hiding. They don't want us to.
They don't, because you raise your hand and guys will like, I know where I'm going for tea break. Which table? How do we handle that governance conversation to just make sure that, not all organizations are, how do we handle that governance conversation?
Yeah, I think the way I see it is the organization has to set up policies, because you are now taking these workloads to the cloud. A lot can happen. These guys have talked about security issues. So you need to set up policies on how you want this, who is managing this, who can make changes to these workloads. Do we even have budgets saying, if we surpass this, can we get an alert? Because you get these situations where somebody comes and tells you, oh yeah, you owe us another $200,000 because you are paying as you go and you busted your, and there was no plan for that. So set up budgets, let it alert you, set up cross-functional teams, because as you know, if you look at all these cloud providers, they all have their, if you look at Azure, they are good at what web-facing interfaces, they're good at mobile apps. So you find that you end up having workloads or having applications running in different clouds. Now, the problem, every one of these guys have their proprietary ways of doing stuff. So that means sometimes I go to an enterprise, I find that you have your on-prem team who are trained on on-prem, you have an Azure team, you have this team, and you're just increasing your budgets. So if you can set cross-functional teams, and even with these teams know who is making what change and how do you capture that change, that goes a long way into governance in the cloud.
Excellent. And for you, Mutua, now that we look, we've seen that governance perspective, AI can never miss in this conversation. So how do we utilize AI tools out there to then ensure that we're able to manage our risk better?
Sorry, yeah. I mean, you cannot leave AI out of any conversation now, right? And I think Gigi shared some interesting insights on a couple of years ago, maybe 2023, 2024, we were talking about it. 2025, if you're not doing something with AI, then your world is about to be turned upside down. I can guarantee you that. So, I mean, is there a place for AI in, handling the hybrid world, concerns in the hybrid world, risk mitigation? If you think about security as a landscape, for example, absolutely yes, yeah. So I think Gigi spoke about agents, right? AI agents. They are there today. Yes, we might be playing with ChatGPT or Llama or DeepSeek or whatever, but in the real world, if you think about some of the concerns I shared, like consistency in tools, for example, how are you going to balance, your concerns and address the risks? I'll give you some simple ones that I'm seeing, right, with our partners and the engagements that I have. So think, for example, about bad actors out there are changing, patterns are changing faster than, clearly we don't like reading books, right? Because we've not read the Data Protection Act, right? So stuff is changing very fast, right? So how do you get ahead of that? Pretty simple stuff. You get an agent that is checking all the 0-day events, for example. As they are coming out there, you have that being validated against a tool that you have, checking whether that tool is up to date. Very basic stuff, right? That's an agent, can do that for you. Your engineer could be focusing on other aspects of automation, right? To make sure that that happens. So how do you orchestrate the participation of that agent in my workflows in the organization? So you've got some playbooks somewhere. So you have an agent that, let's say, for example, checks the 0-day events. You have another agent that looks at the playbook. You have another agent that looks at your SIM tool and the integration of those SIM tools. And for whatever reason, I don't think anyone here as an engineer or can pay an engineer to stay awake 24/7 to fulfill that kind of requirement, right? So you have this supervisor agent that is able to then take all these instructions, and in your sleep, and I think we all like our sleep, if something happens or someone is trying to get to you, that automatically plays out and you get that issue remediated, handled. And by the time you come to the office, you get a report of whatever might have happened. You get it in a nice summarized email that explains to you what actually happened. That is happening. I'm not giving you sci-fi movies. People are doing it. And GG's actually, I think probably you're doing some of that stuff at Avenue. So that's like a place for AI, right? And then think about other complex things like pattern recognition. That's a machine learning AI space. It's very hard for human beings to read certain patterns, even internal ones in our own organization, right? Because threats are not necessarily external. They could also be internal. So how do you have that independent tool that cannot be, compromised? You've done whatever you need to do, automated reasoning to remove biases and all that stuff, to then actually start providing also internal insight. So a very good place for AI. It's a discussion we can have a whole session for. So definitely there's going to be a place for it. And if you think about the hybrid world now, it even becomes more complex, right? So, trying to get a clear picture of the on-prem multi-cloud world without deploying too many tools, right? So that's a place for AI, Timothy. And think about also things like compliance reporting, trying to do things like SOC reporting, things like GDPR evaluations and so on. You could actually start, because there's a baseline for it, right? It's not anything new. You have the baseline for what it means to be GDPR compliant or SOC compliant. You don't have to have someone doing that stuff for you, right? You have an agent that checks against all my infrastructure toolset and all that. Am I GDPR compliant? And you point it to where to look at. So that's a place where AI, it's happening. I mean, we can discuss about it. Some interesting stuff is happening in the industry, Timothy.
Fantastic. I'd like to, as you commented, also like to open it up. We've got a little under 3 minutes, 3 minutes to go. So David, and then we open it up for any questions you may have for this gentleman.
Sorry, real quick, just to support him. These days, you don't have to have 5 or 10 tools. With observability tools, you can have one tool that everybody is feeding to, and it's using AI to make decisions. For example, if you have this server that runs at 80% and the threshold has been set to 75, it does not continue sending alerts. It looks at it and says, over the last 2 weeks, this thing has been running at 80 and these guys have suppressed it. So I'm now moving the threshold myself to 85. Yeah. So
Got you. Any questions from the room? A mic to the front, please. Just under 2 minutes now to go. Right at the front.
I'm not sure. Okay, it's working.
It's good now.
And my question is to Munyao and a very swanky jacket. I think you can be spotted anywhere while walking with it, especially on a hot afternoon. So 2 questions. Is everything designed for the cloud? You've spoken about refactoring. And every time I hear the conversation on cloud, it's always rosy, too good to be true. I'm concerned, you are called in for a consultation and after your assessment, because you said you have to do a lot of planning, there's assessment, but you realize this application cannot work on cloud, even for David. And, you have to make a buck and all that. So is there a criteria for applications that, will not work into the cloud? And we're also seeing stories of, is it cloud repatriation?
Yes.
People are coming back. So what's going on? Is it cost? Is it this thing was then too good to be true? You sold the story that will save costs, but we got there and found nothing is working. Those of us who are maybe using WAF and all that, we realized our traffic goes first to South Africa, then it makes a lot of corners, then it comes back. So maybe if you could speak around that on, as Gigi was saying, vitu kwa ground.
Yeah.
If you could just take us through that. Thank you.
Great question. Maybe all you gentlemen could take it starting with Munyao, and then we'll wrap it up because of time. And we could then engage further during the break. So over to you.
Thank you. That's a fantastic question. Well, not everything is suitable for the cloud as is, right? And that's the reason why we have to first do a deep dive on the discovery, just to understand more on the workload itself, right? Subject for migration of course, because each workload has dependencies, right? What if the dependencies do not exist on the infrastructure that you want to take it to? Then what do you do, right? So that whole process of trying to understand your workload is what determines whether we are going to move it as is, or do we need to replatform, right? Or refactor it. And that whole process is very much technical, that involves, of course, the stakeholders to understand. There's a reason why, as a customer, you want to move this application. Might be that the operating system on which you're running it is no longer supported. So what is the best strategy to move this to the next environment? Could be just a change of operating system. Maybe you want now to containerize the application so that it can become more cloud native. There's a whole process that goes into understanding what is suitable for the cloud as is or not, and trying to, re-architect it in a way that if it must go to the cloud, how we are going to achieve that.
Yeah.
So, which one do you want me to deal with? The cost one or is everything fit for purpose for cloud? The short answer is no. I mean, many times I've told people, no, this one, just forget about it. Because where I come from, AWS, we believe in value. So I'll quickly tell you, if it's either legacy system, it's too complex, interdependencies, poorly designed, cannot scale, don't bring it to the cloud because it's not cloud native, right? So that we do all the time. I do it every day. On the cost bit, where I've seen that come up is where you take you decide as an organization, we want to go to the cloud. And unfortunately, you don't do much consulting in terms of the right discovery, architecture and all that. And you go into the cloud, and for whatever reason, the system you had was actually a pretty good system, and was a platform that was used by many. They were just bearing with you on-prem because that's what was there. Now, all of a sudden, you have a system, people having good access to it, so it's frequently used and all that. And there's no harm in growth, right? The question is, in this growth, am I getting value, right? So we have actually a conversation around how we look at it is revenue and value, sort of cost and value. So while it's costing me more, am I actually getting value out of it? And you have a very interesting graph, and it's been done over the millions of customers that we have, where actually, as you grow, you can actually, for example, simple stuff like you can actually reduce your cost to serve, which by extension means if I'm getting more people on my platform. We've seen it with banks, large enterprises. We have the likes of Netflix and others that build on AWS, right? Netflix in its size runs the entire Netflix on AWS. It's hundreds of millions of people running on Netflix. Cost has never been a concern for Netflix. The discussion we have about Netflix is features, products, how fast they can. So it's a very different discussion, right? But the foundations were well, designed. The right conversation was had. Architectures were put in mind, and I'd be, a bit concerned where someone just said, let's take something to the cloud, and you don't speak to the integrators, you don't speak to the OEM. At least you just have that initial direction on, yes, you can take this thing to the cloud, but this is how scaling works. Because very simple stuff. Like you find, and allow me to say this, Timothy, someone has designed a system in the cloud, but with a CapEx mind. So you don't take advantage of scaling, where at night I can shut down this thing and only bring it back to life in the morning when the first person comes to the office, right? Very basic stuff, but we forget about it. We say, no, the vendor told me this software runs with 10 CPUs, 36 GB memory, 1 terabyte.
That's it.
Storage. So that cannot work in the cloud, unfortunately. Yeah. And it's sort of these discussions that we like to have to delete the cost conversation and actually have a value conversation where it's about speed of innovation, agility, and all that. Yeah.
Thank you, Todd. David, take us home.
So long and short, I think get a consultant. Yeah, get a consultant. I didn't say me, but you need somebody to look at your whole environment, to look at what workloads you're running, to look at maybe you need data mining. They'll be able to tell you, oh, Google is the best in analytics. You look at, because if you call Google, they say, hey, we're the best in everything. You have front-facing applications, they tell you, baby, go to AWS. You want to authenticate, you have processes, go to Microsoft. So get a consultant, let's look at it. By the time now you're calling the vendors, you know what you want. And never put something in one public cloud. Always spread your risk across. Yeah. As the military say, 1 is nothing, 2 is, what does they say? 2 is 1, and 3 is better than 2. So
Excellent. Help me appreciate this gentleman.